A millionaire drowning in guilt, a resilient woman rebuilding her life, and a baby neither expected to bind their fates. Ryan Bennett and Evelyn Parker's past explodes into their present when one fateful encounter forces them to face old lies, broken promises, and a chance at redemption neither saw coming. Can love survive betrayal, or will their reviravoltas tear them apart forever? Ryan Bennett's life could easily make headlines. Millionaire art dealer conquers Manhattan. Yet beneath the layers of charm and luxury, his world was hollow. A corner office in a gallery that hosted reclusive billionaires and iconic paintings offered little solace when the lights dimmed. He had the money, the connections, and the prestige, but loneliness clung to him like a shadow. Ryan drowned himself in reviravoltas of high-stakes deals, crafting an illusion of fulfillment to mask the emptiness left by a past he refused to confront. Meanwhile, Evelyn Parker was miles away, figuratively and literally. In a quaint apartment, she juggled teaching art to restless teens while painting in the quiet hours of dawn. Her life, though modest, held dignity. Each brushstroke on her canvas whispered her resilience, the kind that blooms after betrayal. Evelyn wasn't the woman she once was. She had built herself from the shards of their shared past, and now, a new heartbeat thrived within her, a baby, her reason to move forward despite the weight of old scars. Ryan's world thrived on art and aesthetics, but Evelyn's world thrived on purpose. As he sipped champagne at auctions, she navigated a maze of school budgets and leaky ceilings, creating beauty in spaces others overlooked. And yet, their lives were tethered by a shared history, a turbulent tapestry of love and lies that neither had fully unraveled. The lies Ryan once told himself about Evelyn's role in his life had shattered her dreams. Her departure wasn't just a goodbye, it was a declaration of self-worth. But for Ryan, the past remained an unanswered question. He spent nights poring over every decision, wondering where it all went wrong. Money couldn't erase the image of Evelyn walking away. Her strength haunted him, how she left, head held high, despite the humiliations he'd inflicted. Evelyn had become his greatest regret, her absence a void that no amount of wealth could fill. Evelyn, on the other hand, had found strength in her solitude. The art she taught wasn't just about technique but a way to breathe life into unspoken emotions. Her students adored her, not knowing the battles she had fought to stand before them with unwavering poise. With every passing day, her belly grew rounder, and so did her resolve. She had no space for regrets, only for the future she was building brick by brick. Ryan, though, was stuck in a maze of his own making. He relived their fights, the accusations, and the final blow, his public humiliation of Evelyn, which had left her stripped of dignity. It wasn't just about the lies anymore. It was about the life he denied her. Evelyn's departure had been a wake-up call he was too proud to answer at the time. Now, years later, the echoes of her absence thundered in his soul. As Evelyn prepared her classroom for a new semester, her baby kicked for the first time. The flutter was subtle, yet it ignited a fire within her, a reminder that her journey wasn't just hers anymore. Meanwhile, Ryan's life of glamour began to lose its sheen. The reviravoltas of his gallery successes no longer brought satisfaction. He craved something deeper, something real, but couldn't quite put his finger on what. Little did Ryan know, the answer to his longing wasn't buried in his million-dollar deals or social circles. It was out there, thriving in a small apartment filled with the scent of paint and the promise of new beginnings. Evelyn wasn't waiting for him. She had no reason to, but her presence in his thoughts was inescapable. What if their paths crossed again? Could the lies of the past be rewritten with the truth of the present? Ryan Bennett wasn't a man who frequented small galleries. His world revolved around exclusive events, champagne toasts, and million-dollar deals. Yet, on a whim, or perhaps out of a restless boredom, he found himself wandering into a modest gallery on a rainy Tuesday evening. The walls were lined with local talent, the type of raw, unpolished work that rarely graced his curated spaces. And then he saw it, a painting so familiar, it was like a whisper from his past. The signature in the corner read E. Parker. His heart thudded. Evelyn. He stood frozen, the noise of the gallery fading into the background. The painting was unmistakable, Evelyn's distinct style, bold yet tender, layered with emotions he couldn't name. It depicted a mother cradling her belly, a glowing halo of hope and resilience surrounding her. He didn't need to be told, he knew it was her. But the thought that she was pregnant? It was like a punch to the gut. How had her life moved on while his remained a carousel of regrets? The gallery curator approached, offering polite conversation. Ryan seized the opportunity to ask about the artist, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. Evelyn Parker, the curator said with admiration. She's incredibly talented but refuses to showcase her work more prominently. Teacher, I believe. Pregnant, too, quite the inspiration. Each word hit Ryan like a hammer. Evelyn was thriving, creating, building a life without him. And here he was, still clutching the threads of their shattered past. As the evening wore on, Ryan couldn't tear his eyes from the painting. It wasn't just the art, it was the story it told, one he'd never been part of. Memories of Evelyn flooded his mind, her laughter, her strength, and the day she walked out of his life with nothing but her dignity intact. He'd convinced himself she was better off, but seeing her work now, he realized just how much he'd underestimated her. Evelyn hadn't just survived, she'd flourished. Leaving the gallery, Ryan couldn't shake the image of the painting, or the realization that Evelyn was carrying a child. Was it his? The timing aligned, but he couldn't be sure. The thought sent a chill through him. If it was his, how could he possibly make amends for the lies, the pain, the betrayal? And if it wasn't, did he even have the right to intrude on her life again? Questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and relentless. Ryan spent the night pacing his penthouse, his thoughts spiraling. The luxury surrounding him felt suffocating, mocking even. He'd built an empire, but what did it matter if he had no one to share it with? Money couldn't buy back trust. Millionaire or not, he was powerless against the weight of his mistakes. And now, Evelyn was on the brink of a new chapter, one he wasn't sure he had a place in. By morning, Ryan's resolve had begun to take shape. He couldn't ignore this. Seeing Evelyn's painting was no coincidence. It was a sign, a call to confront the mess he'd left behind. He didn't know how she'd react, but he needed to try. For years, he'd buried his guilt under layers of distractions. Now, he was ready, or so he thought, to face it head-on. But it wasn't just about him anymore. The child in Evelyn's painting represented something bigger than both of them, a chance for renewal, for growth, maybe even for forgiveness. Ryan didn't believe in destiny, but he believed in the power of art to tell the truth. And Evelyn's truth was clear. It was time for him to step out of his world of lies and into hers, no matter the cost. As he prepared to track her down, a mix of fear and determination coursed through him. Evelyn had every reason to shut him out, and he couldn't blame her. But this wasn't about redemption alone. It was about connection, about proving to himself, and to her, that he could be more than the man who had once torn her world apart. Ryan sat in his sleek, modern office, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. The city below pulsed with energy, but his thoughts were 1,000 miles away. He had Evelyn's name written on a scrap of paper in front of him, her address hastily scrawled beneath it. It would be so easy to call her, to show up at her door, to say, what exactly? The weight of his hesitation pressed against his chest. Maybe it was better to leave things as they were. Evelyn had clearly moved on. What right did he have to disturb her life again? Excuses came easily to Ryan, they always had. He told himself she didn't need him. After all, she was strong, independent, and thriving in ways he hadn't imagined possible when she walked out of his life. What could he offer her now, other than reopening old wounds? The truth was harder to admit. He was terrified of what she might say. The thought of facing her anger, her disappointment, her mistrust, made him feel smaller than he'd ever felt before. For years, Ryan had built walls around his emotions, protecting himself from the vulnerability that Evelyn once inspired. He'd told himself lies to justify their breakup, convincing himself that he was better off alone. Now, those lies were unraveling and he was left with nothing but the truth. He had failed her. He had failed them. But admitting that to her? That was a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. His assistant knocked on the door, breaking his spiral of doubt. "Mr. Bennett, the client is ready to discuss the deal," she said. Ryan nodded but didn't move. The gallery deal, worth millions, suddenly felt meaningless. The work he once lived for now seemed like a distraction from the things that truly mattered. Still, he stood, brushed off his hesitation, and went to the meeting, burying his thoughts of Evelyn for just a little while longer. As the hours passed, Ryan tried to focus on his day, but Evelyn's face kept invading his mind. He thought about her laugh, the way she used to light up a room, and the fire in her eyes when she spoke about her dreams. He thought about the times he dimmed that fire with his arrogance and lies, and how he had been too proud to admit it back then. She deserved an apology, but would she even want to hear it? That night, Ryan poured himself a glass of scotch and stared at the painting he'd bought years ago, the only one Evelyn ever sold to him. It hung in his living room, a quiet reminder of everything he'd lost. The colors were vibrant, alive, but every time he looked at it he felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't just a painting, it was a mirror reflecting his failures. He ran his fingers along the frame, wondering if Evelyn ever thought of him when she painted now, or if he was just a distant, unwanted memory. Ryan's doubts turned into restless pacing. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she refused to hear him out? He could handle rejection in business. It was practically second nature, but rejection from Evelyn? That was a pain he wasn't sure he could endure. And then there was the baby. What if the child wasn't his? Did he even have the right to ask? Each question spiraled into the next, leaving him paralyzed with indecision. Lucas, his therapist, had once told him, the hardest step toward change is the first one, acknowledging what you've done. Ryan had dismissed it at the time, but now the words echoed in his mind. He needed to acknowledge his part in Evelyn's pain, but how? Calling her felt intrusive. Writing a letter seemed cowardly. Every option felt wrong, yet doing nothing felt worse. He was stuck, trapped by his own guilt and fear. As the night wore on, Ryan told himself he'd make a move tomorrow. But tomorrow turned into the day after that, and the day after that. Each time he reached for his phone, his courage failed him. It wasn't just about Evelyn, it was about who he had become. Was he even capable of being the man she needed? The man he wanted to be? Doubt gnawed at him, holding him back from taking the leap. By the end of the week, Ryan found himself back at the small gallery where he'd seen Evelyn's painting. He stared at it for what felt like hours, hoping to find some sort of answer in the brushstrokes. Instead, all he felt was the same longing, the same regret. The call to face Evelyn hadn't disappeared, it had only grown louder. But Ryan wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow, he thought. Always tomorrow. Ryan sank into the leather armchair in Lucas's office, his usual air of confidence replaced by a restless unease. The soft lighting and the faint scent of sandalwood did little to calm him. He stared at the floor, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "I saw her painting," he said, his voice low. "She's pregnant. I think it might be mine." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken regret. Lucas, his therapist of nearly a decade, leaned forward slightly. "And how did that make you feel?" he asked gently, his tone coaxing rather than probing. Ryan laughed bitterly. "Like I've been punched in the gut. Like I've been running from everything for years, and it all just caught up to me." His laughter faded, replaced by a hollow expression. "I don't even know if I have the right to reach out to her." "You're here, Ryan." "That's a start," Lucas said, his voice steady and calm. "But it's not enough to just feel guilty. Guilt without action is just self-pity." Ryan winced at the bluntness, but he knew Lucas was right. He'd built a fortress of excuses and distractions, convincing himself that his past mistakes could be buried under layers of wealth and success. Now, Evelyn's painting had cracked that facade wide open. "What am I supposed to do?" Ryan asked, his tone teetering between desperation and frustration. Lucas regarded him for a long moment. "You start by being honest with yourself. You've spent years hiding behind lies, convincing yourself you were justified, that you didn't need to change. But deep down, you know the truth. You hurt her. And you have to own that, no matter how painful it is." Ryan's shoulders slumped. "Even if I do, what if it's too late? What if she doesn't want to hear it?" Lucas's eyes softened. "That's a possibility you have to accept. Apologies don't come with guarantees. But this isn't about her forgiveness, not entirely. It's about facing the man you've been and deciding if that's the man you want to be for the rest of your life. The words struck a chord deep within Ryan. He thought about the life he'd built. A life full of reviravoltas and high-stakes deals but devoid of real connection. He thought about Evelyn, standing in that gallery, her strength and resilience shining through her art. She had moved forward, carved out a life of meaning. And here he was, still tethered to the lies he'd told himself to avoid facing the truth. Lucas's voice broke through his thoughts. Ryan, the past doesn't define you unless you let it. You have a chance to rewrite your story, not by erasing what happened, but by learning from it. By showing up not as the man you were, but as the man you're trying to become. The words settled over Ryan like a challenge, one he wasn't sure he was ready to take on. I don't even know where to start, Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas offered a faint smile. You've already started. The question is, will you keep going? The silence that followed was thick with unspoken resolve. Ryan didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps? Or maybe the beginning of courage. As Ryan left Lucas's office that evening, the city lights stretched before him like a labyrinth of choices. He knew the road ahead would be messy, uncomfortable, and filled with uncertainty. But for the first time, he felt the stirrings of a new determination. Evelyn deserved more than an apology. She deserved proof that he could be better. And maybe, just maybe, he could prove it to himself too. Ryan stood on the steps of Evelyn's modest apartment building, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might leap out of his chest. The address Lucas had encouraged him to visit was scrawled on a piece of paper clenched tightly in his hand, now damp with sweat. This wasn't the grand penthouses or polished art galleries he was used to. It was real, grounded, and completely foreign to him. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the doorbell. A part of him wanted to run, to escape back into the safety of his curated life. But the other part, the part that had brought him here, refused to let him. The door opened before he could press the button. Evelyn stood there, her face as unreadable as the canvases she used to paint. She didn't look surprised to see him, but neither did she look pleased. Her growing belly was the first thing Ryan noticed, a silent but powerful reminder of the life she was creating without him. Ryan, she said simply, her tone cold but not unkind. The weight of her gaze was heavier than any accusation. I wanted to talk, Ryan stammered, his usual confidence evaporating under her scrutiny. Evelyn crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the doorframe. You wanted to talk? After years of silence? Her words cut through him like a knife. He deserved it, every ounce of her bitterness. He'd spent years avoiding this moment, pretending it wasn't necessary. Now, standing before her, he realized just how much he had underestimated her strength. Ryan's mind raced, searching for the right words. I saw your painting, he finally said, his voice faltering. It brought back a lot of memories. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Memories, she repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. What kind of memories, Ryan? The kind you spent years running from? Her words weren't cruel, but they were brutally honest. And for the first time, Ryan couldn't hide behind his usual defenses. I know I hurt you, he admitted, the words feeling foreign yet strangely liberating. I know I have no right to be here, but He paused, struggling to find the courage to finish. Evelyn tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. But you what? She asked, her voice quieter now, though no less firm. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken emotions. Ryan finally met her gaze, his own filled with a mixture of guilt and vulnerability. But I want to make things right. I don't know if I can, but I want to try. Evelyn let out a small, mirthless laugh, shaking her head. Ryan, you can't just show up here and expect to fix everything with a few words. Life doesn't work that way. Her voice softened, but her resolve remained unshaken. I've built something for myself, something that doesn't revolve around you. I know, Ryan said quickly, his desperation seeping through. I'm not here to disrupt your life. I want to be part of it again, even if it's just a small part. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stepped back slightly, her grip on the door loosening. "You've got a lot to prove, Ryan. And not just to me." The unspoken challenge in her words hung in the air. As the door closed softly in his face, Ryan felt a strange mix of relief and determination. Evelyn hadn't sent him away completely, but she hadn't exactly welcomed him either. This was only the beginning, a tentative first step across the threshold of a journey he wasn't sure he was ready for. But if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was this: he wasn't turning back. Ryan's days quickly became a minefield of challenges, each one testing the resolve he barely managed to summon. Evelyn wasn't making anything easy for him, and he couldn't blame her. Every attempt he made to connect was met with cautious skepticism. A text asking if she needed help setting up her classroom was ignored. A carefully written email offering financial support for the baby received a curt, "I don't need your money, Ryan." Each rejection stung, but he reminded himself that this was the price of rebuilding what he'd broken. Claire, Evelyn's best friend, became one of Ryan's most vocal critics. A fiercely loyal ally to Evelyn, Claire had been there through the aftermath of their breakup, and she wasn't about to let Ryan waltz back into Evelyn's life unchecked. "You don't get to show up out of nowhere and pretend you've changed," she snapped during one particularly tense encounter at the school where Evelyn worked. "If you're here to play the hero, save your breath." Her words were sharp, but Ryan couldn't deny their truth. He didn't deserve Evelyn's trust, not yet. Victoria, his current partner, also added fuel to the fire. She'd been quick to notice Ryan's distraction, the way his thoughts lingered elsewhere during their dinners or business events. "You're obsessed with her," Victoria accused one night, her voice tinged with jealousy. "If you're still in love with Evelyn, just admit it." The accusation struck a nerve, not because it was false, but because Ryan couldn't fully face it himself. The life he had with Victoria was comfortable, predictable. But compared to what he'd lost with Evelyn, it felt hollow. Despite the setbacks, Ryan found an unexpected ally in Claire, albeit a reluctant one. After seeing him quietly leave an art supply delivery at Evelyn's apartment door, Claire began to soften. She didn't fully trust him, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in his actions. "If you're serious about this," she told him one afternoon, "you need to stop making grand gestures and start showing up in smaller ways. Evelyn doesn't need promises, she needs consistency." Taking her advice to heart, Ryan began attending Evelyn's school exhibitions without making a spectacle of himself. He watched from the back, marveling at the way Evelyn's students lit up when she spoke about their work. Her passion was palpable, her dedication unshakable. These quiet moments became his lifeline, a reminder of what he was fighting for. But even then, he kept his distance, respecting the boundaries Evelyn had set. The tests didn't end there. One evening, Evelyn confronted him after spotting him at yet another exhibition. "Why are you here, Ryan?" she demanded, her voice filled with equal parts frustration and exhaustion. "Are you trying to prove something? To me? To yourself?" Ryan swallowed hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm here because I care," he said simply. "Not just about you, but about the life you're creating, for the baby. I want to help, even if it's just from a distance." Evelyn's expression softened slightly, but she didn't relent entirely. "Actions, Ryan. Not words," she said before walking away. Her response, though brief, felt like a glimmer of hope, a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see his efforts for what they were. Still, Ryan knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. Every rejection, every test, felt like another layer of his old self peeling away. The Ryan who once cared only for appearances and money was slowly being replaced by someone he barely recognized, someone willing to fight for something real. But as much progress as he'd made, he couldn't ignore the shadow of his past mistakes, nor the possibility that Evelyn might never fully forgive him. One thing was certain: the journey was far from over. For every small step forward, there were reminders of how much further he had to go. But Ryan was learning that redemption wasn't about shortcuts or easy victories. It was about persistence, patience, and proving himself not through grand reviravoltas, but through quiet, consistent effort. Ryan found himself standing in the dimly lit auditorium of Evelyn's school, surrounded by the buzz of excited parents and students preparing for a modest art exhibition. It was the kind of event that once would have seemed beneath him, a far cry from the grandeur of his own gallery's galas. But tonight he was here for one reason: Evelyn. She had asked him, indirectly through Claire, to help with the setup. It was a small step, but the significance wasn't lost on him. This was the first time Evelyn had willingly let him into her world, even if only for an evening. He worked quietly, hanging canvases and arranging sculptures made by Evelyn's students. He could feel her presence across the room, giving instructions with the same confident grace he remembered from their years together. She moved differently now, her growing belly a constant reminder of the life she was nurturing, a life that might be his. Watching her, Ryan felt a pang of longing and regret. She seemed so self-assured, so in control, and it only magnified how lost he felt in comparison. As the exhibition began, Ryan lingered in the background, watching Evelyn in her element. Her students crowded around her, their faces alight with admiration as she spoke about their work. There was no bitterness in her tone, no trace of the pain he had inflicted on her. Instead, there was pride and encouragement, qualities he hadn't fully appreciated back when he had them in his life. He realized then how much he had underestimated Evelyn, not just her strength, but her capacity for resilience. Evelyn approached him during a rare lull in the evening, her expression neutral but not unkind. "You're good at this," she said, gesturing toward the well-arranged displays. Ryan shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Years of practice," he replied. The conversation was brief, almost impersonal, but it felt like a victory nonetheless. She hadn't walked away. She hadn't dismissed him. And that was enough, for now. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Ryan found himself alone with Evelyn in the quiet auditorium. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. "Why are you really here, Ryan?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't accusatory, but it carried an edge of vulnerability that caught him off guard. Ryan hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I want to be better," he said finally. "For you, for the baby, for myself." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. "Words are easy, Ryan. They don't erase the past." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of her guarded heart. "I'm not asking you to erase it," Ryan replied softly. "I just want to be part of what comes next, if you'll let me." The vulnerability in his voice was genuine, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw something soften in her expression. As they cleaned up the remnants of the exhibition, Evelyn handed him a small, wrapped package. "This is for you," she said, her tone unreadable. Ryan opened it carefully, revealing a sketch of a father holding a child's hand. It was simple but profoundly moving. "It's what you say you want to be," Evelyn explained. "Now you have to prove it?" Her words were a challenge, but the act of giving him the sketch felt like a small crack in the walls she had built around her heart. Walking home that night, Ryan couldn't stop looking at the sketch. It was more than a drawing. It was a symbol of hope, a sliver of belief that he might have a place in Evelyn's life again. But he knew better than to mistake it for forgiveness. Evelyn's trust wasn't something he could win back with gestures or promises. It was something he would have to earn, day by day, moment by moment. The road ahead still felt impossibly long, but for the first time, Ryan felt like he was walking in the right direction. The sketch in his hand was a reminder of the man he wanted to become, a man worthy of Evelyn's trust and the life they might one day build together. As he stepped into the night, the quiet streets of the city seemed less daunting, and his resolve felt stronger than ever. The fluorescent lights of the clinic buzzed faintly as Ryan sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped tightly together. He'd never felt so out of place, surrounded by parents and soon-to-be parents, all eagerly anticipating news of their growing families. His gaze shifted to Evelyn, who sat across from him, flipping through a well-worn parenting magazine. She looked calm, almost serene, but Ryan knew better. Beneath that composed exterior was the same tension knotting his stomach. This wasn't just another step in her pregnancy, it was a test of whether he truly belonged here. When Evelyn's name was called, Ryan hesitated, unsure if she wanted him to follow. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable, and gave a small nod. It was the first sign of acceptance she'd shown in weeks. He stood, suddenly feeling like a child unsure of his place, and trailed behind her into the exam room. The walls were adorned with pastel posters about prenatal care, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. The doctor's voice was calm and professional as she began the ultrasound, narrating each step with practiced ease. But Ryan barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where a grainy image flickered into view. The room fell silent as the rhythmic thump of a heartbeat filled the air. It was steady, strong, and utterly overwhelming. Ryan's breath hitched, and for a moment, the world outside that small, sterile room ceased to exist. "That's your baby," the doctor said with a warm smile, breaking the spell. Evelyn's gaze shifted from the screen to Ryan, studying his reaction. He didn't cry, though he felt the weight of tears threatening. Instead, he nodded, his jaw tight, as if the simple motion could anchor him in the reality of what he was seeing. The sound of the heartbeat echoed in his chest, stirring something deeper than words could express. As the appointment continued, Ryan barely spoke. The questions Evelyn asked, the advice the doctor gave, all of it felt like background noise to the revelation pulsing through him. This was real. This was happening. He wasn't just a man trying to atone for past mistakes anymore. He was going to be a father. The weight of that truth settled over him, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Outside the clinic, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken emotions. Evelyn walked ahead of him, her steps measured. Ryan hesitated before speaking. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice laced with vulnerability. Evelyn stopped, turning to face him. "For what?" she asked, her tone cautious. Ryan met her gaze, his own filled with a raw honesty she hadn't seen in years. "For letting me be there. For letting me hear." Evelyn's expression softened, but only slightly. "This doesn't mean everything is fine, Ryan," she said firmly. "You're here now, but being here once doesn't make up for all the times you weren't." Her words stung, but Ryan nodded. "I know," he replied. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." There was no grand declaration, no attempt to sway her with promises. Just the simple truth. The car ride home was silent, but not in the way it used to be. It wasn't the suffocating silence of resentment or anger, but something closer to contemplation. Ryan kept glancing at Evelyn, catching her in moments where her guard seemed to drop. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she wasn't pushing him away either. And for now, that was enough. That night, as Ryan sat in his apartment, he replayed the sound of the heartbeat in his mind. It was a reminder of what he was fighting for, not just Evelyn's trust but the chance to be part of something bigger than himself. The image of the ultrasound lingered too, fragile yet powerful, much like his place in Evelyn's life. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. Ryan stood in the middle of the small art studio Evelyn had set up in her apartment, the faint smell of turpentine and fresh paint lingering in the air. Canvases leaned against the walls, each one bursting with color and emotion. Evelyn sat at her work table, her hands moving deftly as she mixed paints. Ryan had been coming around more often lately, helping where he could. Tonight, for the first time, she had asked for his opinion on her work. It wasn't much, but to Ryan, it felt like a breakthrough, a small but meaningful sign that she was beginning to let him in. "You really think this one is worth finishing?" Evelyn asked, gesturing toward an abstract piece on the easel. Ryan nodded earnestly. "It's not just worth finishing, it's powerful." "Feels like you," he said, his voice soft. Evelyn gave him a skeptical look but didn't argue. Instead, she returned her focus to the canvas, her brush moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Ryan watched her, feeling an overwhelming mix of admiration and gratitude. She was letting him be part of her world again, even if only in small doses. As the evening wore on, Evelyn surprised him further. "I'm thinking about organizing an exhibition," she said casually, her eyes still on the canvas. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "An exhibition? That's amazing," he said, his excitement genuine. Evelyn hesitated, her movements slowing. "It's for the students. They've been working so hard, and I think they deserve to see their art celebrated." Ryan smiled. "You're incredible, you know that? Always putting others first?" Evelyn glanced at him, her expression unreadable. It's not about me, Ryan. It's about them, and about making sure they feel seen. Her words were humble, but Ryan could see the spark of pride in her eyes. He knew how much this exhibition meant to her, not just for the students but as a step toward reclaiming the career she had put on hold. "Whatever you need, I'm here to help," he offered, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't immediately dismiss him. Over the next few weeks, Ryan threw himself into the preparations for the exhibition. He helped coordinate the venue, sourced materials for the students, and even used his connections to secure a local gallery space. Evelyn watched him with a mixture of surprise and cautious appreciation. He wasn't just talking about being there, he was proving it day by day. And though she didn't say it aloud, a small part of her was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. The night of the exhibition was a success. The gallery buzzed with energy as students proudly showed off their work, their faces alight with joy. Evelyn moved through the crowd with the ease of someone in her element, her words encouraging and kind. Ryan stayed in the background, content to watch her shine. He didn't need to be the center of attention. This night was hers and hers alone. Seeing her like this, vibrant and confident, filled him with an unfamiliar sense of peace. At the end of the evening, Evelyn found Ryan standing near one of the student sculptures. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice breaking the steady hum of conversation around them. Ryan turned to her, surprised. "For what?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated, then shrugged. "For helping. For showing up. For not making this about you." Her tone was lighter than he'd expected, almost teasing, but her words carried a weight he didn't take lightly. Ryan smiled, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. "You're the one who made this happen, Evelyn. I just moved a few boxes," he said, trying to downplay his role. Evelyn rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she gestured toward the students, who were still buzzing with excitement. "They did amazing, didn't they?" Ryan nodded. "Because they had you." As the crowd began to disperse, Ryan offered to help clean up, but Evelyn waved him off. "Go home, Ryan. You've done enough for one night." Her words weren't dismissive, they were almost kind. Ryan lingered for a moment, as if trying to memorize the way she looked in this moment. Strong, determined, and just a little less guarded than before. "Good night, Evelyn," he said softly before leaving the gallery. Walking home, Ryan felt lighter than he had in years. The reviravoltas of his life no longer felt like punishments but opportunities to grow. Evelyn's small acts of trust, her willingness to let him help, were more valuable to him than any million-dollar deal he'd ever closed. And though he knew there was still a long way to go for the first time, he believed they might just get there, together. The weeks following the exhibition were filled with a cautious but undeniable shift. Ryan continued to show up, not with grand gestures or promises, but with quiet consistency. He helped Evelyn with errands, brought art supplies for her students, and even joined her for prenatal classes when she allowed it. He didn't push for conversations about the past, knowing she wasn't ready, but every moment they spent together felt like a step towards something neither of them could yet define. One rainy afternoon, Ryan showed up unannounced at Evelyn's apartment, a box of groceries in hand. "Thought you might need a few things," he said awkwardly, standing in the doorway as she eyed him suspiciously. "You're not going to leave until I let you in, are you?" she asked, a hint of exasperation in her tone. Ryan grinned sheepishly. "Probably not." With a sigh, Evelyn stepped aside, allowing him in. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. As they unpacked the groceries, their conversation flowed easier than it had in years. They talked about her students, the baby, and even her hopes of returning to painting full-time one day. For the first time, Ryan felt like they were on even ground. No accusations, no defensiveness. It was a fragile piece, but he clung to it like a lifeline. "You're really good at this," Evelyn said suddenly, surprising him. "At what?" Ryan asked, glancing over. "At being normal," she said, a teasing smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. But the road back was far from smooth. Ryan still faced doubts, both from Evelyn and within himself. One evening, as they walked back from a doctor's appointment, Evelyn stopped abruptly. "Ryan," she began, her tone serious, "why are you really doing all this? Is it guilt? Obligation? or something else? The question hit him harder than he expected. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because I want to," he said simply. "Because I care. About you. About the baby. About making things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Evelyn didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression softened. She nodded once and continued walking, leaving Ryan to wonder if his answer had been enough. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to fully convince her, or himself, that he deserved a second chance. But for the first time, he felt at peace with the uncertainty. He wasn't trying to win Evelyn back. He was trying to become someone worthy of being in her life. As the weeks turned into months, Ryan found himself making changes he hadn't thought possible. He stepped back from the high-stakes world of his gallery, focusing instead on smaller, community-based art projects. He began mentoring young artists, using his resources to support those who didn't have the opportunities he once took for granted. It wasn't just about impressing Evelyn anymore. It was about building a life he could be proud of. Evelyn noticed the changes, though she rarely commented on them. Instead, she observed quietly, her own walls slowly beginning to lower. She invited Ryan to a prenatal yoga class, then to help paint the nursery. These small invitations felt monumental to Ryan, who took each one as a sign that he was earning back her trust, not through words, but through actions. One evening, as they worked together on the nursery, Evelyn turned to him suddenly. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Ryan paused, his paintbrush hovering midair. "Regret what?" he asked cautiously. "Everything," Evelyn said softly. "The lies, the way things ended between us." Ryan set the brush down, meeting her gaze. "Every day," he admitted. "But I don't regret learning from it. It made me realize what I lost, and what I'm willing to fight for." Evelyn didn't respond immediately, but her silence wasn't cold this time. It was contemplative, almost tender. For the first time, Ryan felt like they were truly on the same path, not as a couple, but as two people trying to build something better out of the rubble of their past. The road back wasn't just about redemption or forgiveness. It was about creating a future where both of them, and their child, could thrive. As they finished painting the nursery, Evelyn glanced over at Ryan, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're not half bad at this," she said, her tone light. Ryan chuckled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "I had a good teacher," he replied. The moment wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. The delivery room was a whirlwind of chaos and emotion, a storm Ryan hadn't fully prepared himself for. Evelyn gripped his hand with a strength that startled him, her determination etched into every line of her face. The sound of monitors beeping and nurses moving swiftly around them faded into the background as Evelyn focused on bringing their daughter into the world. Ryan stood beside her, his heart pounding, feeling both helpless and awestruck. He had never been more terrified, or more certain, that he belonged here. Hours later, when the room finally settled, a nurse handed Evelyn a tiny, wriggling bundle wrapped in soft pink blankets. Evelyn's expression shifted from exhaustion to pure wonder as she looked down at the baby in her arms. Ryan watched her, unable to speak. And then, as if sensing his hesitation, Evelyn glanced up at him. "Lillian," she said softly. "Her name is Lillian." The sound of it felt like a balm to his weary soul, a name full of hope and new beginnings. Ryan reached out tentatively, his hands trembling as he held his daughter for the first time. Lillian's tiny fingers curled instinctively around his thumb, and in that moment, something within him shifted. The guilt, the regret, the lies, they were still there, but they no longer defined him. Holding his daughter, he felt a clarity he'd been chasing for years. He wasn't just trying to prove himself to Evelyn anymore. He was trying to become someone Lillian could look up to. Over the next few days in the hospital, Ryan remained by Evelyn's side, fetching water, adjusting pillows, and soothing Lillian when she cried. Evelyn didn't say much, but her silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone watching, waiting, weighing his actions against the words he'd spoken months ago. Ryan didn't push for conversations or ask for forgiveness. He simply stayed, present in every small moment. One evening, as Lillian slept in her bassinet, Evelyn finally broke the silence. "You've changed," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ryan looked at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. "I've been trying," he admitted. "For you? For her? For me?" Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze shifting to their daughter. "I see that. And I appreciate it. But I need to know, is this who you really are now? Or is this just temporary?" Ryan met her eyes, his own filled with vulnerability. "This is who I'm trying to be," he said honestly. "Every day, I'm working on it. And I know I might stumble, but I promise you, Evelyn, I'm not going anywhere." His words weren't rehearsed or polished. They were raw and for once, entirely true. Evelyn studied him for a long moment before giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. As they settled into a new routine back at Evelyn's apartment, Ryan found himself stepping into a role he'd never imagined for himself. Midnight feedings, diaper changes, and lullabies became his new normal. Each task, though small, felt monumental. And with every moment he spent with Lillian, his connection to her, and to Evelyn, deepened. He wasn't just present, he was invested. Evelyn watched him with cautious admiration, her guard slowly lowering as Ryan proved, time and again, that he was there to stay. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lillian asleep in Ryan's arms, Evelyn spoke softly. "You're not the same man I left all those years ago." Ryan glanced at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and humility. "I'm trying not to be," he said simply. The resurrection wasn't just Ryan's transformation, it was the rebirth of their connection. It was tentative and fragile, but it was there, growing stronger with each passing day. For Evelyn, it wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about seeing the man Ryan had become and choosing to believe in the possibility of a future together. As Ryan tucked Lillian into her crib that night, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey wasn't over, and the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges. But for the first time, Ryan felt ready to face them, not as the man he used to be, but as the man he was becoming. And as Evelyn joined him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, Ryan knew they were no longer walking this path alone. The opening night of Evelyn's art exhibition was nothing short of magical. The gallery, filled with her bold and evocative pieces, buzzed with admiration from attendees. Ryan stood quietly at the back of the room, watching as Evelyn glided through the crowd, radiant in her element. This wasn't just a return to art for her, it was a triumphant declaration of everything she had overcome. She spoke with confidence, her words weaving the story behind each piece, and Ryan couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She was brilliant, resilient, and wholly her own. Evelyn's students had their own corner in the gallery, showcasing their work under her guidance. Their smiles were infectious as they explained their pieces to curious onlookers. Ryan found himself talking to a group of them, sharing his insights into the art world while encouraging their ambitions. He'd once lived for high-stakes deals and wealthy clients, but this felt real. Helping nurture young talent, seeing their joy and pride, reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with art in the first place. As the night wound down, Evelyn found Ryan near a vibrant abstract piece that had drawn a steady crowd. "It's her favorite," Evelyn said softly, nodding toward a woman admiring the painting. Ryan turned to her, surprised. "And yours?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly, her gaze drifting across the room. "That one," she said, pointing to a smaller, quieter piece in the corner. It depicted a father holding a child's hand, their silhouettes framed by the soft glow of a setting sun. "It's not for sale," she added quickly, her voice carrying a hint of emotion. Ryan understood immediately. "Lillian?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening. "And you?" she said after a pause. Ryan felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. It wasn't just a painting, it was a reflection of her guarded hope, her willingness to let him be part of the life they were building together. He reached for her hand, hesitant but determined, and she didn't pull away. Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied and the lights dimmed, Ryan helped Evelyn pack up the remaining pieces. They worked in comfortable silence, the air between them no longer heavy with unresolved tension. When they finished, Evelyn turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying more weight than the two simple words suggested. "For believing in me. For everything." Ryan shook his head, his own smile gentle. "Thank you for giving me the chance to. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful every day that you let me try." Evelyn held his gaze, her smile widening slightly. "Maybe you deserve more credit than you give yourself," she said softly. Her words felt like a balm to wounds he hadn't realized still lingered. As they left the gallery together, Ryan carried Lillian in his arms, her small head resting on his shoulder. Evelyn walked beside him, her presence steady and warm. For the first time in years, Ryan felt whole. He had spent so long chasing money, status, and approval, only to find true fulfillment in the quiet, unglamorous moments that now defined his life. The lies and mistakes of his past no longer loomed over him. They had become lessons, stepping stones towards something better. Their journey wasn't over. Evelyn's trust, while growing, was still fragile. Ryan knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where he would have to prove himself, not just to her but to the man he was becoming. But as they walked together through the quiet streets, Lillian's tiny breaths a soft rhythm in the night, Ryan felt a sense of peace he'd never known before. They weren't just rebuilding what had been broken. They were creating something new, something stronger. Together, they had found a way to turn pain into purpose, regret into growth, and separation into connection. And as the city lights stretched before them, Ryan knew that their story, though filled with twists and reviravoltas, had only just begun.